Hello, I'm Graeme Thomson.
Hello, I'm Silvia Maglioni.
And we're very happy to be able to present our film In Search of UIQ at this Reina Sofía retrospective, Possible Futures.
And we are particularly happy to be part of this futurity retrospective, because the whole project, both the film and the other works that the film originated, were actually very concerned with the futurity of an unmade film. So maybe we can start saying a few things about how we discovered this unmade film in the archives. When we went to IMEC, which is a big archive in the north of France, in 2010, we actually looked into a Guattari box that said cinema. In that we discovered that Guattari wanted to be a filmmaker, and we found 3 versions of this science fiction film script: Un amour d'UIQ, A love of UIQ, together with other political projects that he wanted to work on, one around Radio Alice and the other one around autonomia. So our first concern was to publish this material, because it was completely unknown, and also how to publish it. And so it was a long process of research, and we wrote the introduction to the script. And then, of course, we also wanted to imagine how to reveal this unmade film through a film that we would make ourselves. The question of the film was very connected to our work around what we could call the unmade, or the unmaking. In French we could say désœuvrement. And the question was how to make a film that wouldn't be Guattari's unmade film, but a film that would be like a spectral cartography of its possible futurities.
One of the things that initially interested us in the story of Guattari's attempts to make a science fiction film was the shift that took place in his own cinematic desires and preoccupations between early scripts which were inspired by political movements, particularly in Italy in the late 1970s, and the move towards a kind of more fabulatory or imaginary horizon of political possibility that dovetailed with the golden age of science fiction, in which we see a lot of stories of alien visitation on the one hand and parasitic contamination on the other. In a way, it was kind of linked to a kind of twilight of certain political movements, the long wake of 68, and the descent, as Guattari saw it, into the winter years of the 1980s, when there was a kind of shutdown of possibilities and a very kind of violent channeling of subjectivity towards what emerged more fully as the neoliberal model. In this context, UIQ, the infraquart universe, is a very interesting figure, because on the one hand it is a kind of dispersed, invisible, multiple, and ungraspable particle of subjectivity, which contains enormous potentials for change and for expansion of what humanity could be, or what simply living beings could be in a much wider sense. And on the other hand, as Guattari developed this idea in his script, as UIQ becomes captured by certain mechanisms of human relations, it also represented the kind of dangers of a hyper-individualism that were, in a sense, dawning at that period. In fact, UIQ, the tragedy of UIQ is partly that it tries to find an embodiment, and an embodiment in a sense that is part of kind of hetero-patriarchy complex. So there's a kind of sense that weak runs aground on this, in this attempt to find a kind of human embodiment that essentially limits its possibilities. And I think that in some sense was a kind of maybe slightly comic allegory of this move towards very, very kind of closed off, solipsistic subjectivity. The other thing about weak is, of course, the way in which its pattern, its way of contaminating things affects both people and machines, and a certain ubiquity of effect that weak produces. And this is, I think, connects to another of Guattari's preoccupations in the 1980s, which was the rise of digital culture, and particularly the recoding of, the overcoding, one might say, of, in a sense, all aspects of life according to a digital model where things became endlessly translatable, and what was not translatable was gradually filtered out and could find no place in the new spheres of communication and data exchange.
So the film we made, In Search of UIQ, that we are going to see tonight, is composed of 3 parts. The first part, Cinebacteria, is, let's say, the genealogy of Guattari's filmmaking attempts, and it's around the different film projects that we found in the archives. So in this spectral cartography, we were trying also to experiment with different forms of unmadeness. So in the second part, that is called Distant Encounters, we were imagining a figure, Felix in Hollywood, as a kind of reenactment of Félix Guattari's desire to be a filmmaker. So we went to Hollywood, basically, and we tried to look for the producer that rejected the project in 1982. Together with that, Los Angeles gave us also the idea to consult a tarot reader. We went to see a tarot reader and asking her to predict the future of this unmade film. At the same time, we were also imagining what we can call a ghost trailer, a trailer for the film as if it was coming out in the cinemas. So that we did with Arte Radio, and so in the film you're going to see tonight, we edited bits of the recording of this radio trailer, imagining that the characters were just lost characters. So the third part of the film, Shadow Bearers, is an attempt to go back to the archives and our archival work, and in a way it's also a response to Guattari's theory of the winter years that he developed in his book Les Années d'Hiver.
Now, as I said at the beginning, I think it's quite interesting to look back on this film and on Guattari's project, particularly in the way that an unmade film continues, in a sense, to make itself available to new possible readings, more than a film which, in a sense, has become, in a sense, fossilized or crystallized, has become crystallized in time. And the aspect of viral contamination that weak, in a sense, represents is obviously very, very prescient in relation to the pandemic situation that affects us now. And it's perhaps interesting to reflect how the aspect of contamination in Week initially represented a kind of a possibility of change, of a change in sensibility, a change in the way we relate to each other, the way we relate to the environment, the way we relate, the way we use machines, and how that somehow pre-echoes a situation in which we are faced with a real viral contamination of unknown or semi-known origin, and certainly with unknown or unforeseeable consequences, and how perhaps this should offer us an opportunity to think about how this very, very ubiquitous event can actually make us think about reshaping the dynamics of our society.
So we're leaving you now with the film In Search of UIQ. Buona visione.
Buona visione.